March 12, 1935, San Diego Bay, California. A gray morning mist clings low over the Pacific. The air smells of salt and aviation fuel. Mechanics in oil-streaked coveralls crouch along the dock as a massive, ungainly aircraft bobs gently on the water. A strange hybrid of boat and bird. Its twin radial engines rest high above the fuselage on a parasol wing, and its hull gleams with riveted aluminum. From the control tower, a few Navy officers watch the machine rock in the tide. One of them, Commander Harold Hal Jenkins, squints through binoculars and chuckles. "Looks like a bathtub with wings," he mutters. The men around him laugh. The craft in question is the prototype XP-3Y1, built by the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. Few believe it will amount to anything. In an age of sleek monoplanes and powerful land-based bombers, a flying boat seems like an anachronism, a relic of the 1920s. But standing on the dock beside it, Chief Test Pilot William Wheatley isn't laughing. He runs a gloved hand across the nose of the aircraft and feels the potential beneath its awkward frame. Moments later, the engines roar to life. Twin Pratt & Whitney R-1830. Twin Wasps, spinning to a deep, confident growl. As the Catalina, or rather, what would become the Catalina, begins to taxi across the bay, spray explodes behind it in twin plumes. The aircraft shudders, lifts its bow, and then, with a heave, breaks free from the water. For a brief moment, the laughter on the dock fades. The flying boat rises steadily, the Pacific glinting beneath its wings. Inside the cockpit, Wheatley grins and calls to his co-pilot over the noise of the engines. "Not bad for a bathtub, huh?" But back on the ground, skepticism remains thick. Navy planners still see limited use for such an aircraft. Slow, vulnerable, and unarmored. A seaplane patrol craft, they argue, could never compete with long-range bombers or modern destroyers. Yet the world is changing faster than they realize. 4 years later, September 1st, 1939. War erupts in Europe. German U-boats swarm the Atlantic like wolves, preying on merchant convoys. The British, desperate for long-range patrol coverage, scramble to fill the gaping hole between coastal airfields. Land-based aircraft can't reach the mid-Atlantic gap, the so-called Black Pit, where ships vanish without a trace. The Admiralty turns to the Americans for help. Among the offers on the table is a patrol flying boat, the PBY Catalina. At first, Royal Air Force officers scoff at the sight of it. A bulbous, slow-moving aircraft with a crew of 8 and a cruising speed barely topping 125 knots. But as convoys continue to burn on the horizon, practicality begins to outweigh pride. Soon, squadrons of Catalinas, marked with British roundels, begin to appear along the coasts of Iceland, Newfoundland, and West Africa. Their mission: patrol, rescue, and reconnaissance. The crews quickly learn that while the RAF Catalina may look clumsy, it is a survivor's aircraft. It can stay aloft for nearly 20 hours, skim low over stormy seas, and even land on open water to rescue survivors. Its long wingspan, over 100 feet, gives it the endurance no other aircraft can match. The mockery that once surrounded the flying boat begins to fade, but it will take one extraordinary mission, a single, daring act of persistence over the gray Atlantic, to prove to the world that the Catalina isn't a joke. It's a lifeline, and when that day comes, no one will be laughing. May 26, 1941, North Atlantic Ocean, 700 miles west of Ireland. The sea is a graveyard of fog and steel. Waves churn like mountains, smashing against the bellies of merchant ships limping through the gray haze. Overhead, the rhythmic thrum of twin engines echoes through the mist. The sound of a consolidated PBY Catalina, call sign Oscar Charlie. Inside the cramped fuselage, Flight Lieutenant Dennis Briggs of the Royal Air Force Coastal Command peers through the frosted window of the observer blister. His eyes are bloodshot from 12 hours of scanning endless ocean. Salt crusts his eyebrows. His hands tremble slightly from the vibration of the engines. "Anything?" calls out his skipper, Flight Lieutenant Dennis Nixon, over the intercom. Briggs shakes his head, though no one can see it. "Just more fog. Visibility's nil." They've been out since dawn, flying a slow racetrack pattern over the North Atlantic, part of the desperate hunt for one ship, the pride of the German Kriegsmarine, the battleship Bismarck. 2 days earlier, the Bismarck had sunk HMS Hood, killing over 1,400 men in mere minutes. Now, the British fleet scours the ocean to find her, but in the vast expanse of grey sea, the trail has gone cold. Hours drag on. Fuel dwindles. The men in the Catalina are exhausted, flying blind through fog and wind, their uniforms damp with condensation. The Atlantic smells of brine and oil, a mix that clings to everything. Then, at 10:30 a.m., the radar operator, Sergeant Leonard "Len" Davis, jolts upright. His screen flickers with a faint echo. "Contact, bearing 215, range 15 miles. The crew stiffens. Nixon banks the Catalina toward the signal, eyes narrowing through the forward windscreen. The fog begins to thin, and through the mist, a dark shape emerges, long, sleek, cutting through the waves at tremendous speed. "There she is," Briggs whispers. "The Bismarck." It's an awe-inspiring sight, and a terrifying one. The German battleship slices through the grey water like a predator, her bow throwing up curtains of spray. Her massive guns swivel slightly, scanning for threats. Nixon grips the yoke tighter. "Mark the coordinates and send them, Len." "Now!" Davis transmits furiously, tapping out the Bismarck's location to British command. It's a moment that will shift the course of naval warfare. Within hours, British aircraft from HMS Ark Royal will launch a torpedo strike that cripples the Bismarck's rudder, sealing her fate. But for now, the Catalina crew has to survive. As they circle for confirmation, the Bismarck's anti-aircraft batteries open fire. The air erupts with black puffs of flak. One shell explodes close enough to rock the Catalina, rattling rivets and shattering a side window. Briggs ducks instinctively as shards of glass pepper his face. "Hold her steady," Nixon shouts. The engines roar as the Catalina banks hard, climbing through turbulent air. Smoke trails off the wingtip. For a moment, the entire Atlantic feels alive. The thunder of guns below, the desperate cry of men above, the sky and sea merging into chaos. By sheer luck and skill, Nixon keeps the flying boat aloft. They break away, limping through clouds, every man silent. When they finally turn for home, their message already sent. The crew knows what they've done. The laughter that once haunted the Catalina's name is gone. No one will call it a bathtub now. Hours later, back at base in Lough Erne, Ireland, a crowd gathers as the battered aircraft taxis up to the dock. Nixon climbs out first, soaked and trembling. Someone hands him a cigarette, and he lights it with shaking hands. "What's the news?" the mechanic asks. Nixon exhales slowly. "We found her." Word spreads like wildfire. The RAF's flying boat, the one they'd mocked as too slow, too outdated, had spotted the Bismarck and turned the tide of the hunt. The Catalina has drawn first blood. But the war over the Atlantic is far from over. The true test will come not in hunting battleships, but in fighting an invisible enemy beneath the waves. August 17th, 1942. Mid-Atlantic, near convoy SC-94. The sky is a cold steel grey, and the wind whips the sea into violent whitecaps. Beneath that churning surface, the enemy waits. A German U-boat wolf pack. 3 Type 7 submarines, led by Captain Lieutenant Otto von Schrader aboard U-210, stalk a slow-moving convoy of merchant ships bound for Halifax. Above them, the steady drone of engines grows louder. A PBY Catalina. Call sign, Charlie Able, 321, sweeps low across the waves. Its faded blue-gray paint bears the insignia of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Inside, Pilot Officer Howard Mac Mackenzie keeps one eye on the instruments and another on the white-crested swells below. The crew has been in the air for 10 hours. Their coffee is cold, their rations stale, but none of them are complaining. They've seen what happens when the U-boats get through. "Look sharp," Mackenzie says, his voice crackling through the intercom. Wolfpack's been reported somewhere in this sector. In the waist blister, Sergeant Frank Taylor scans the horizon through binoculars, his breath fogging the glass. The Catalina's engines hum steadily, echoing like a heartbeat through the hull. Every man aboard knows that one flicker on the surface, one faint wake in the water, could mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of sailors below. Then Taylor freezes. "Wake off the port bow. Looks like a periscope trail." Mackenzie banks the aircraft hard left. The Catalina dips low, wind howling through the open gun ports. Below, the faint outline of a periscope cuts through the waves, slicing a thin scar across the Atlantic's surface. "U-boat spotted, bearing 210, Taylor shouts. Mackenzie reacts instantly. "Prepare depth charges." The bomb aimer, Flight Sergeant Alan Grant, kneels over the open sight window in the nose. His hands grip the release lever. As the Catalina roars overhead, the shape of U-210 becomes visible, surfacing to make a run on the convoy. Its deck gun crew scrambles to man their weapon, but they're seconds too late. "Now!" Grant yells. 4 cylindrical depth charges tumble from the Catalina's belly, spinning through the mist before vanishing into the sea. 1 second, 2, 3. The ocean erupts in a column of white spray and smoke. The concussion slams through the Catalina's hull, and Mackenzie struggles to keep control. Below, U-210 heaves upward, its stern lifting out of the water before collapsing into a bloom of black oil and debris. "Direct hit!" Taylor cheers, pumping his fist. The crew breaks into exhausted laughter, adrenaline surging through every vein. The Catalina banks away as debris and oil spread across the surface like a dark stain. They circle once, taking photographs for confirmation, but Mackenzie's face remains grim. He's seen enough war to know victory here is fleeting. For every U-boat they sink, another 2 seem to take its place. Back at base, when Charlie Able 321 lands and taxis toward the dock, a crowd of ground crew waits to meet them. The men climb out, soaked in sweat and oil, their eyes red from the salt air. Reporters will later call it one of the first confirmed U-boat kills by the RCAF. Still, Mackenzie doesn't celebrate. "We got lucky," he says quietly, "but the sea's big, and we can't be everywhere." He's right. In the months to come, the Atlantic becomes a chessboard of death. Convoys stretch from horizon to horizon, protected by escort ships, but still stalked by unseen enemies. Every night, red and orange flashes burn on the horizon. As another tanker explodes, another freighter sinks. And through it all, the Catalinas fly, day after day, in rain, fog, sleet, and storm. They are the eyes of the Atlantic, searching endlessly for the next periscope, the next oil slick, the next faint hope of survival. But soon, their mission will change again. No longer hunters. They will become angels of mercy. February 5th, 1943. North Atlantic, 200 miles south of Iceland. The storm hits without warning. Sheets of freezing rain slam the waves into violent chaos, and gale-force winds tear across the sea. Somewhere beneath the tempest, a Liberator bomber from Coastal Command has ditched after running out of fuel on patrol. 8 men are adrift in an inflatable raft, clinging to survival as waves toss them like driftwood. The cold gnaws at their bones. Their raft is half filled with water, and their emergency rations have already washed away. Through the roar of the wind, they can barely hear the faint buzz of an aircraft engine above. It's a PBY Catalina from RAF Castle Archdale, Call sign Foxtrot Able 970. At the controls is Flight Lieutenant Jack Worsley, a calm, deliberate pilot with the patience of a surgeon. His crew has been out for nearly 14 hours. Their mission initially a routine patrol for U-boats. Then, they picked up the distress call. Now they're flying into the teeth of the storm. "Visibility's under a mile," calls out the navigator, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "If they're still alive, we're going to have to get right on top of them." Worsley nods grimly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." He banks the Catalina down through the clouds. The sea below is chaos. Waves like black cliffs, white spray exploding with every impact. The aircraft shudders violently as gusts buffet its wide wings. Every instinct screams to turn back. But there are men out there, and the Catalina was built for this very moment. At last, a flare bursts through the gloom, a single red light arcing weakly above the storm. "There!" shouts the observer. "Survivors at 2 o'clock." Worsley lowers the flaps. The engines groan in protest as he fights to bring the flying boat down between the swells. It's madness. Landing in seas like this could easily tear the aircraft apart. But there's no other choice. "Brace!" he yells. The hull slams into the water with bone-rattling force. For a moment, everything disappears in spray and thunder. But when it clears, the Catalina is still afloat, rocking violently but intact. "Engines to idle," Worsley orders. "Let's find those boys." Through the cockpit windows, the crew spots the life raft, half collapsed, men waving weakly as the waves threaten to swallow them. 2 of the Catalina's crew climb onto the wing, roped to the fuselage, and toss out a rescue line. One by one, they haul the survivors aboard, numb and frostbitten, but alive. It takes nearly 40 minutes to complete the rescue, each second a battle against wind and wave. By the end, the Catalina is heavy with water, her engines straining to lift off again. Worsley waits for a brief lull between swells, then shouts, "Full power!" The engines scream as the flying boat bounces across the waves, spray cascading over the cockpit windows. For a moment, it seems, she'll never lift. But then, with a roar, the Catalina claws her way skyward, breaking free from the ocean's grasp. Cheers erupt inside the fuselage. The rescued airmen, too weak to speak, can only nod their thanks. As they head back toward base, the gray dawn begins to break through the storm clouds, painting the Atlantic in pale gold. Below them, the sea rolls endlessly, indifferent, unforgiving. Back on land, as medics rush to treat the survivors, Worsley steps out of the Catalina and looks back at her. She's battered, dented, her hull lined with salt scars and bullet patches from past missions. Yet she's still flying, still saving lives. Word of the rescue spreads quickly through Coastal Command. Newspapers will later call the Catalina the ship that can fly, a name that captures both her ungainly grace and her stubborn will. To the men who owe her their lives, she's something more than an aircraft. She's a guardian, a set of wings between life and the deep. But as the war grinds on, even this guardian will face her greatest trial. The deadly black waters of the mid-Atlantic Gap, where survival is measured in minutes. April 14th, 1943. The mid-Atlantic Gap. The Black Pit. There is no land for 1,000 miles in any direction. No beacons, no lighthouses, no safety, just wind, water, and war. The PBY Catalina George Baker, 724 of the U.S. Navy Patrol Squadron VP-84 cuts through the low clouds, its engines echoing across the endless gray. Inside, the crew is silent. They've been patrolling the same patch of sea for 14 hours, searching for a convoy reported under attack. The Black Pit, this cursed stretch of ocean, is the deadliest route on Earth. Beyond the range of land-based aircraft, convoys are left nearly defenseless against U-boats. Hundreds of ships have gone down here. For years, Allied sailors have called it the graveyard. But that's changing. The Catalina, with its extraordinary range, can now patrol these waters, bringing eyes and protection to the most isolated convoys. At so 9:15 hours, radar operator Ensign Robert Davis picks up a faint return. Contact. 20 miles out, bearing 095. Lieutenant Commander James Harkins leans over his shoulder. Could be one of ours? Davis shakes his head. No, sir. She's running too low and too fast. That's a sub. Bring us around, Harkins orders. We'll go in low. The Catalina banks through mist, descending until the waves seem close enough to touch. Spray flickers across the cockpit glass. Suddenly, a black shadow breaks the surface, a U-boat running partially submerged, racing toward the convoy. U-boat sighted, shouts the nose gunner. The sub's crew sees them too. Hatches slam open and anti-aircraft gunners scramble onto the deck. Orange muzzle flashes streak upward. Bullets rip through the air, tearing holes through the Catalina's right wing. Hold her steady, Harkins growls. The smell of cordite and burning insulation fills the cabin. The Catalina shakes violently as rounds punch through the fuselage, but the crew stays on target. Arm the depth charges. The bomb aimer, Petty Officer Jack Rutledge, crouches over the sight window. His voice is calm despite the chaos. Steady, steady. The U-boat's wake widens. They're diving. This is their only shot. Now! 4 depth charges drop clean, hitting the water in a perfect line. Seconds later, the sea erupts in a wall of fire and foam. The Catalina bucks upward from the blast wave, nearly flipping on its side. Through the smoke, a dark hull bursts to the surface. The U-boat split open like a crushed tin can. Then it's gone, swallowed by the Atlantic. Silence. The crew lets out a collective breath. Rutledge leans back, trembling with exhaustion. Good hit, skipper. But Harkins doesn't celebrate. He circles once more, scanning the oil-slicked water. Through binoculars, they spot survivors, German sailors clinging to wreckage, their grey uniforms stark against the black sea. For a long moment, no one speaks. The men of VP-84 have seen too, much death to take joy in it. Harkins sighs and nods. Radio and the coordinates. Tell rescue to send a destroyer. The Catalina banks toward home. Another day in the black pit, another enemy sunk, another ship saved. As they cross back into range of Allied radio, the sun breaks through the clouds, scattering light across the waves. It's the first sunlight they've seen in days. The men stare quietly, because in this war, even light feels like a small miracle. By 1944, the tide in the Atlantic will have turned. The Catalinas, once dismissed as obsolete, now patrol every corner of the ocean. They have sunk dozens of submarines, rescued hundreds of downed airmen and shipwrecked sailors, and provided the vital eyes that helped convoys survive. But before the war's end, one last act will cement their legacy forever. An impossible rescue under fire that defines what the Catalina truly is. June 3rd, 1944. Bay of Biscay, off the coast of France. Dawn breaks over a pale green sea. A thin fog lingers on the horizon, and beneath it, the world waits for invasion. In less than 3 days, the Allies will storm the beaches of Normandy. But first, the Atlantic must be secure. Every convoy, every ship carrying troops and supplies depends on men like these, the patrol crews of the PBY Catalina. Flight Lieutenant Andrew Marshall, commanding RAF Coastal Command's Catalina Zulu Charlie 4501, has been in the air since midnight. His orders are clear. Sweep the Bay of Biscay for German submarines attempting to ambush Allied invasion convoys. The men are exhausted, running on coffee and nerves. They've been flying almost daily for months, but none complain. They know D-Day is coming, and if the U-boats get through, thousands of soldiers might never make it to shore. At 06:42 hours, radar operator Corporal Thomas Green stiffens in his seat. Contact. 10 miles. Moving east. Marshall leans forward. Let's go say hello. The Catalina descends into the fog, its long wings slicing through the gray. The sea below is eerily calm. Then, the periscope flash, a glint of steel cutting across the water. Submarine dead ahead. Marshall brings the aircraft lower. The German crew, realizing they've been spotted, crash dive. The U-boat vanishes beneath the surface, leaving a whirlpool of white foam. They're going under fast, Green shouts. Marshall's eyes narrow. Not fast enough. He banks sharply and releases a spread of depth charges right over the fading slick. The bombs detonate in perfect sequence. 4 booming flashes that tear through the sea. For a moment, there's nothing. Then a massive plume of black oil bursts to the surface. Good work, lads, Marshall says quietly. That's one less to worry about come Tuesday. The Catalina turns for home, the morning sun breaking through the mist. Below them, the waves shimmer gold, a rare, fleeting beauty in a war defined by gray. As they approach base, radio chatter crackles with reports of success. Across the Atlantic, other Catalinas have done the same, striking down submarines, escorting convoys, rescuing survivors. The laughter that once followed the ungainly flying boat has long since vanished. By war's end, the PBY Catalina will have served in every ocean, every major theater. She will sink over 100 enemy submarines, rescue more than 10,000 stranded airmen and sailors, and fly over distances no other aircraft of her era could match. Her crews will remember her not for her looks, but for her spirit, the way she carried them home through fog, storm, and fire when nothing else could. August 15th, 1945. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The war is over. The sea is calm again. A single Catalina floats quietly in the harbor, its hull rocking gently in the afternoon sun. The paint is faded, the wings patched and worn. But to anyone who looks closely, she still carries the aura of purpose. A veteran that has earned her rest. A young sailor walks along the dock, running his hand over the hull's rivets. The letters stenciled near the cockpit read, PBY 5A, Maggie. She doesn't look like much, the sailor says softly. An older man beside him chuckles, a former crew chief, his uniform sun-bleached and frayed. Yeah, that's what we all said, back when we didn't know any better. He gazes out at the horizon, the sun reflecting off the water like 1,000 tiny mirrors. But when you're halfway across the Atlantic, low on fuel, engine coughing, waves taller than the plane, you pray for a Catalina, because if she's out there, she'll find you. The sailor nods slowly, and together they stand in silence as gulls wheel overhead. The Catalina never broke speed records. She never dazzled crowds. But she did something more important. She endured. She turned laughter into respect, doubt into legend, and the cold Atlantic into something just a little less lonely. And long after the war, when most of her kind are retired to museums or left to rust, one thing remains certain. The PBY Catalina, the flying boat they laughed at, saved more lives than any other aircraft of its time,